The air inside the hearing chamber was so still it felt like a held breath. Outside, the world churned with noise, anchors speculating, pundits spinning, hashtags trending. But in this moment, inside these cold, polished walls, Jasmine Crockett sat silent, unmoved. She wore a deep navy suit, pressed sharp as a blade. Her eyes didn't wander. They were fixed forward, locked on the dais ahead. She knew what she was about to say would detonate across the country, and she was ready. 2 hours earlier, the court's clerks had delivered the order. A federal gag directive rushed through by Trump's legal team. Buried under procedural language and emergency statutes was a single calculated aim: shut her up. Specifically, silence her mention of Tiffany Trump. The claim? That discussing Tiffany would violate emotional privacy statutes designed for vulnerable witnesses. It was a legal muzzle, a trap. But Jasmine had been in cages before. When her name was called, she stood with the weight of the Constitution behind her and the fire of a woman who'd read every line of that order, twice. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I understand the restrictions placed upon me," she began, slow and deliberate. "But what I have to share today involves a matter of public corruption, not private sentiment." Murmurs fluttered across the chamber. A single beat passed. Then, "This information," she continued, "originated not from surveillance or subpoenas, but from a member of the Trump family who tried to do the right thing and was buried for it." And with that, she dropped the name they'd tried to scrub from the record. Tiffany Trump. Gasps, camera shutters, phones lighting up across the country. Trump's team had gambled on fear, but Jasmine Crockett, she was finished being afraid. The text arrived at 2:14 a.m. Jasmine stared at her phone under the weak glow of her desk lamp. And sleep was a stranger that night, pacing just outside the window but never entering. She had been going over her notes again and again, cross-referencing campaign finance reports, offshore routing numbers, even matching the digital timestamp on an internal email Tiffany had once forwarded to a Trump accountant. But now, the screen showed something colder. Order granted. Gag request approved under emergency privacy protection motion. Effective immediately. Subject: T. Trump. She didn't blink. She just let the screen light flicker across her cheekbones, quiet and damning. They were scared. Trump's legal team had struck fast. Leveraging an obscure clause in a 1990s child witness protection statute, they'd argued that Tiffany Trump, despite being an adult, despite being a graduate of Georgetown law, was a potential victim of familial coercion, and therefore entitled to sealed status. It was thin, legally speaking, but in Washington, fear was often stronger than law. Jasmine leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. It wasn't the first time she'd been told to be quiet. It wouldn't be the last. Her phone vibrated again. This time, a message from her chief of staff. "Senate counsel says if you even mention her name tomorrow, they'll hold you in contempt. We need to pivot. Fast. Pivot." She looked at the manila folder on her desk. Inside were 3 pages, emails, a routing slip, and a note in Tiffany's handwriting. Nothing bombshell, but enough. Enough to show that she had tried to ask questions, that she had uncovered something that didn't add up, and that someone close, had told her to drop it. Jasmine's hands rested on the folder like it was a confession. She didn't want to destroy Tiffany. That wasn't the goal. In truth, what Jasmine saw in those messages wasn't collusion. It was fear. A daughter reaching out, maybe for help, and being met with silence. She rose from her chair and walked slowly to the window. D.C. was quiet at night, but tension buzzed in the air like electricity before a storm. Across town, the Trump team was already drafting press releases. They expected her to comply. They expected her to blink. But Jasmine didn't come to Washington to dance around billionaires. She came to break their silence. The next morning came sharp and cold. Jasmine entered the Capitol like a woman walking into trial. Her staff moved in silence around her. Every step down the marble hallway echoed louder than it should have. As they passed the committee hearing room, one aide whispered, "You can still redact the name. We can make the point without saying it directly." Jasmine stopped walking. She turned to him. "If I redact it," she said, voice steady, I become part of the silence, and that silence has protected corruption longer than I've been alive. No one spoke after that. Inside the chamber, final preparations began. Senators arrived one by one, expressionless. Cameras were mounted, journalists found their perches, and in the back corner, a junior staffer adjusted the teleprompter script for the chair's opening statement, carefully omitting any reference to the gag order controversy. Jasmine sat alone at the witness table, eyes forward, palms resting flat. A producer from MSNBC mouthed her name behind the glass. The country was watching. Her mic blinked red. The chair leaned forward, voice dry and formal. Ms. Crockett, you may proceed with your opening remarks, so long as they are in full compliance with the gag motion entered into record this morning. Jasmine didn't nod. She just reached down, picked up the manila folder, and opened her mouth. She had always been the outlier. While Ivanka soaked up the spotlight and Don Jr. swaggered across stages, Tiffany Trump drifted quietly on the margins, not absent, but edited. A smiling presence at the RNC, a photo op at Mar-a-Lago, a carefully staged Instagram in front of a campaign banner, but never center stage, never a part of the real machine. Jasmine Crockett had studied the Trump ecosystem for years. She knew the patterns, the loyalty tests, the pecking order, the brutal calculus of proximity to power. And Tiffany? She was a ghost in a gilded cage, used when needed, ignored when not. But it wasn't until Jasmine's office received the leak that she realized how deep the distance ran. It had come quietly, through a legal intermediary, an envelope with no return address and a note that read only. She tried. No one listened. Inside was a 2021 financial compliance log, flagged with 2 items. A $2.7 million political expenditure funneled through a tax-exempt PAC, and a routing slip showing it had landed in a shadow firm in Cyprus. Beside it, printed in crisp black ink, was an email chain. Tiffany Trump had sent the first message. To Alan Weisselberg, subject, clarification. Hi Alan. I noticed this line item while reviewing archived reports. Just wanted to confirm this transfer was cleared through campaign finance protocol. Looks unusual. 2 hours later, the response. Tiff, drop this. It's internal. That was it. 1 sentence. No explanation. No reassurance. Just a door slamming shut. Jasmine had stared at that line for minutes, the gravity of it sinking in. Tiffany hadn't threatened anyone. She hadn't leaked anything. She had just asked. And in the Trump empire, that alone was rebellion. A former Mar-a-Lago aide, speaking off record, filled in the rest. According to her, Tiffany's sudden move to Miami wasn't voluntary, nor was the trust fund her name was quietly attached to in Delaware. She was bought off, the aide said flatly, paid to disappear. In the weeks following that email, Tiffany's LinkedIn page went silent. Her speaking engagements were canceled. She withdrew from an alumni panel at Georgetown and declined all media invitations. Then, almost surgically, she went as gone. Buried behind glossy family photos and political chaos was a woman in her late 20s who may have tried to speak up, only to find herself swallowed by the same machine her father had weaponized for decades. Jasmine didn't know Tiffany, but she knew that silence. The kind that makes your voice feel like contraband, the kind that wraps around your lungs until breathing becomes a betrayal. She didn't want to drag her through the mud. God knows Tiffany had probably suffered enough. But the truth? The truth belonged to everyone, and in that truth, Tiffany wasn't a target. She was a witness. Inside the chamber, Jasmine pulled the page from the folder, running her finger lightly across the line that read, "Do not pursue this line of questioning. It has been handled." She thought about how many other women had been told that, told to be quiet, told it was already handled. Handled by who, and at what cost? The clerk approached quietly. "We're 5 minutes out," he whispered. "Chair says to expect a motion to strike if you mention her name." Jasmine smiled without warmth. Then they'd better be ready to strike the whole damn hearing. The clerk hesitated. "You sure you want to do this?" Jasmine stood, straightened her jacket, picked up the folder. She asked a question. She said softly, and they silenced her for it. Then she turned toward the microphone and walked forward, because if Tiffany couldn't speak, Jasmine would. The hearing chamber buzzed with a low, electrical tension, the kind that settles into the lungs, makes breathing shallow, and drapes over even the most seasoned senators like invisible static. Cameras lined the back wall, each with a blinking red light, each feeding millions of screens across the country. C-SPAN, CNN, Fox, YouTube live streams with comment threads that scrolled too fast to read. Even TikTok had its bootleg clips ready, waiting for something, anything, to go viral. Jasmine Crockett sat alone at the front witness table, her notes untouched. She didn't need them. What she carried couldn't be summarized in bullet points or legal citations. It was heavier than that, quieter, like a truth buried too long. Across from her sat the committee, 12 senators, each cloaked in the ceremonial chill of bipartisan formality. Some leaned forward curious. Others leaned back, waiting to pounce. The chair, Senator Melrose, an aging moderate with a flair for procedural deflection, cleared his throat and adjusted his microphone. "Ms. Crockett," he began, tone clipped but courteous, "you are here today to provide testimony regarding campaign finance irregularities and potential ethics violations tied to the 2020 and 2021 election cycles. You are advised that a federal gag order has been entered into the record concerning private family members of former President Trump. Any deviation from that order may result in censure or contempt." Jasmine didn't flinch. Her hands were folded neatly atop the manila folder, her expression unreadable. She waited until the chamber settled. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she said evenly. "I understand the parameters." And then she looked up, and the room shifted. "Before I begin," she said, her voice clear, measured, "I want to make something absolutely transparent. What I'm about to share is not personal. It is not speculative. It is not rumor. It is a matter of public concern involving the ethical obligations of elected officials and the misuse of campaign funds." Melrose's brow furrowed. A murmur ran down the dais. Jasmine continued, steady as a scalpel. "I will be referring to a specific individual, not to cast blame, but to highlight a pattern of suppression. The information I present comes directly from official documentation and is tied to a broader campaign finance inquiry already under revise. W. The chair interjected sharply. "Ms. Crockett, if you are referring to the individual protected under the gag..." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't blink. "The name is Tiffany Trump." The chamber exploded in whispers. Reporters scrambled to type. One senator slammed their pen down. A gavel struck wood. "Order!" Melrose barked. "You are violating—" "No, I am not," Jasmine replied, her tone ironclad. "This is not conjecture. I am presenting a public record email sent from a former First Family member to a Trump Organization accountant. It pertains directly to the rerouting of $2.7 million in political contributions." The chair paused. His eyes darted to the committee counsel. "Is it verified?" Jasmine opened the folder slowly and handed a sealed document to the clerk. "This is a time-stamped authenticated communication. No speculation, no interpretation. It's a question Tiffany asked, and one she was told never to repeat." The envelope slid across polished mahogany. Silence returned like a curtain falling. The weight of the name Tiffany Trump hung in the air, not scandalous, not salacious, but quiet, human, fragile. "I am not here to expose her," Jasmine said. "I am here because her question was buried, and in that silence, a crime may have been protected." Cameras zoomed in. Live broadcasts labeled it "Shock Twist in Crockett Testimony." On Twitter, #TiffanyTrump trended within 7 minutes. Some praised Jasmine for standing up to the dynasty. Others accused her of dragging innocent family members into partisan warfare. But none of that mattered. Not in that room. Because Jasmine had just pulled the thread, and the fabric was already unraveling. Across the country, people leaned closer to their screens. What was once just another hearing had turned into something far rarer, a moment of reckoning. The chandelier in the Mar-a-Lago dining hall rattled faintly, but not from wind. The sound came from Donald Trump's voice, sharp, guttural, and cracking at the edges as it pierced through a closed-off corner of the resort, where A fundraising dinner had just turned into a crisis command center. He held a silver iPhone in one trembling hand, the other clutching a crumpled napkin he'd used to blot his forehead 3 times in the last minute. The red velvet chair beneath him creaked as he stood and paced. On screen, a muted Fox News stream showed a still image of Jasmine Crockett holding up a folder, the chyron beneath it screaming in all caps. "Crockett defies gag order. Drops Tiffany Trump bombshell." "This is defamation," he barked. "This is a coordinated hit job. On my daughter." Alina Habba, standing a few feet away, phone to ear, nodded frantically at someone on the other end of the line. She mouthed the words, "File the injunction now." Trump stopped pacing. His voice dropped an octave. "She was never supposed to be dragged into this. We handled that in 21. Alan said it was done, sealed. How the hell did this woman get her hands on those emails?" Habba hesitated. "We believe there was a leak from one of the transition staffers, possibly a compliance analyst from the internal audit team. We're trying to track down who had clearance." "I don't care who had clearance." Trump slammed his palm on the table. "You shut this down, tonight. I want a judge on this before the morning cycle." But the wheels were already turning faster than any emergency order could catch. Across town, journalists were calling up old archives. Congressional aides were texting each other screenshots, and legal experts on cable news began openly speculating. If Tiffany Trump found evidence of campaign finance violations and was silenced, could she be considered a suppressed witness? Meanwhile, in the committee chamber, Jasmine sat composed. A junior clerk approached her discreetly and whispered, "Trump's team just filed a second injunction. They're trying to reclassify Tiffany's 2021 email as non-evidentiary private communication." Jasmine barely looked up. "Let them. They're threatening to sue for abuse of process." She turned her head just enough to lock eyes with the young aide. "Tell them to read the Constitution." Word had already reached Capitol Hill. Republican senators huddled in tight corners, whispering about whether to distance themselves or defend. Meanwhile, the progressive bloc seized on the moment. Representative Presley tweeted, "Truth has no NDA." Jamal Bowman wrote simply, "Let her speak." But perhaps the most deafening silence came from Tiffany Trump herself. Her verified social accounts were dark. No posts, no statements, no denials. Back in Palm Beach, Trump rubbed his temples and muttered, almost to himself, "She was weak, always too sensitive, always emotional. She never understood loyalty." Habba paused, carefully choosing her next words. "She may have understood it differently." The words stung more than he let on. Trump stepped away from the table, staring out through the glass windows into the manicured darkness of the Mar-a-Lago lawn. The noise in his head wasn't from the press. It wasn't from Jasmine. It was from memory. The last time he'd spoken to Tiffany face-to-face had been at a quiet breakfast, weeks after he left office. She had asked him then softly, "Dad, were those campaign records real?" He changed the subject, poured orange juice, told her to focus on law school. She never asked again. Now, with the nation watching and Jasmine Crockett holding the receipts on live television, that breakfast had come back like a ghost. Trump turned from the window. "Get Tucker. Get Steve Bannon. Hell, get Elon if we have to. We're not losing this headline." But even as he shouted, even as new statements were drafted and war rooms spun up, the story had already slipped his grip. Because what Jasmine had exposed wasn't just a data point. It was a daughter, ignored, silenced, and now, unwillingly, standing at the heart of his unraveling empire. The rose. Tom had settled into a kind of suspended disbelief. No one was breathing normally anymore. Senator Melrose cleared his throat again, this time with less authority and more uncertainty, his earlier warnings hanging limp in the air. Aides scribbled notes frantically, cross-checking Jasmine's claims against archived filings. Phones buzzed behind committee chairs. Somewhere, a legal clerk was calling the Library of Congress to verify a timestamp. But Jasmine didn't move. She was still, controlled. Her voice was low when she spoke again. Not performative, not rehearsed, just measured and deliberate, as if she already knew the oxygen had left the room. "I'd like to submit 3 pieces of documentation into the record," she said, unfolding the manila folder with a crisp snap that echoed through the chamber like a match striking the edge of a box. The clerk approached slowly, cautious now, as if he were collecting live ammunition. Jasmine slid the first page forward. Exhibit A, an email dated March 14, 2021, sent from Tiffany Ariana Trump to Alan Weisselberg. The subject line is simply, clarification. Reporters leaned forward. The chair adjusted his glasses. She didn't read the email aloud. She didn't have to. The transcript was projected on the monitor for the press to photograph freely. A soft gasp rose from the gallery. "I noticed this line item while reviewing archived reports. Just wanted to confirm this transfer was cleared through campaign finance protocol. Looks unusual." Crockett's gaze didn't leave the committee as she continued. Exhibit B, the transaction routing slip for the mentioned item. It shows a $2.7 million movement from a PAC affiliated with the Trump campaign into an unregistered firm based in Cyprus. A murmur buzzed at the far end of the dais. One of the Republican senators shifted uncomfortably, whispering to his aide. Another pulled out his glasser to look at the data himself. Crockett handed over the second page, the routing numbers circled in red ink. And finally, Exhibit C. She held it in her hands for a moment longer, heavier than the others, not because of weight, but because of voice. It was a handwritten note, a printed scan of a memo from one of the Trump organization's internal accountants, found in the digital archive where the routing slip had been logged. It read, "Weisselberg has reviewed this. Do not file in audit." Silence. Then the gavel again. But this time, even Melrose hesitated before striking. "These documents, Ms. Crockett, have they been independently verified?" "They have. By 2 forensic analysts. I have the certification ready to submit." She slid the signed affidavit across the table. But then, Jasmine did something that no one expected. She reached into the folder once more and produced a small flash drive. She passed it wordlessly to the clerk. The screen flickered, and a waveform appeared. A soft voice played over the room. Tiffany Trump. Quiet. Nervous. Recorded on a private call with her legal counsel months before the gag order ever existed. "I found something I wish I hadn't. And now I don't know who to trust. Not even my own family." The words hung in the chamber like smoke. No theatrics. No need for them. Just the sound of a daughter in the shadows. Afraid, cornered, and unheard. When the audio ended, no one moved. Jasmine placed her hands back on the table, folded, steady. "I want to be clear," she said, eyes scanning each face before her. "I am not accusing Tiffany Trump of wrongdoing. I am not using her to score political points. I am testifying that a private citizen attempted to question a financial irregularity and was silenced, first by her own family and now by this courtroom." She leaned slightly forward, tone shifting like a sudden drop in temperature. She did everything right. She asked the right questions, and the response was a wall of silence, manipulation, and, eventually, legal exile. The chairman was frozen, his mouth slightly open, unsure whether to respond or recess. But Crockett wasn't waiting for permission. She finished with a whisper that still carried weight across every screen in the country. She wasn't protected. She was contained. It started within minutes. Before the chamber could recess, before the clerk could even catalog the flash drive, the country had already seen it. Screens in cafes, airports, and barbershops lit up with Jasmine Crockett's image, her voice clipped and replayed on a loop. Cable hosts dropped their planned segments mid-broadcast. Twitter imploded. #Tiffany tapes trended within 12 minutes. The phrase, "do not file an audit," was etched into the American vocabulary like Watergate's smoking gun. Outside the Capitol, a wave of reporters flooded the marble steps like a tide, cameras hoisted, mics thrust toward the building's ornate entrance, shouting Crockett's name even before she emerged. Inside, the members remained seated in stunned paralysis. Crockett stood slowly, collected her folder, and nodded to the court recorder like nothing unusual had just happened. But outside, everything had changed. CNN cut live to a split screen. Jasmine walking down the steps on one side, Tucker Carlson's face frozen in disbelief on the other. He stammered as he tried to improvise. If what we just heard is accurate, and that's a big if, we may be looking at a kind of familial sabotage? Fox tried to pivot. MSNBC leaned in. NPR called it a seismic breach in the armor of political silence. But no one had control over the narrative anymore. The people did. Clips of Tiffany's voice, quiet, trembling, scared, were remixed over montage videos on TikTok, layered with solemn piano music and statistics about campaign finance corruption. A former Trump staffer tweeted and then deleted, "We knew she'd seen it. We just didn't think she'd talk." The backlash was rapid. Protesters appeared outside Mar-a-Lago by dusk. A woman held a cardboard sign. "You silenced your own daughter?" Some waved American flags upside down. Others held posters of Jasmine Crockett photoshopped as a courtroom Joan of Arc. At a coffee shop in Michigan, a mother whispered to her teenage daughter, "This is bigger than politics, honey. This is about trust." That night, on Rachel Maddow's show, a former federal prosecutor broke it down bluntly. Crockett didn't just show receipts. She outlined a pattern, a system of silencing, shielding, and redirecting attention away from financial irregularities. This is not about Tiffany. This is about the rot at the core. Back in Washington, Jasmine was still in her office. The lights were low. Just her and the documents. She hadn't spoken to the press. She hadn't returned calls. Her chief of staff hovered near the door, phone in hand. "You've got 5 interview requests, all the majors. They're calling it a takedown." Jasmine didn't look up. "I'm not here for a takedown." The staffer nodded. "Still? It's everywhere. They're saying you're the first to crack it." She finally looked over, voice soft but unwavering. "No, Tiffany cracked it. I just gave her a mic." He hesitated. "You know what's coming, right? The machine's waking up. Legal teams, PR firms, family loyalty press tours. They're going to frame this like you bullied her into leaking." "I didn't," she said flatly. "They won't care." She stood and walked toward the window, looking out over the Capitol's glow. Protesters had gathered with candles now, flickers of light in the darkening streets. Not just activists, ordinary people, nurses, veterans, teenagers, mothers, even some who'd once voted red. The machine was waking up. But so were the people. The staffer spoke again, quieter now. "They're going to come for you, Jasmine. You know that." She nodded. "I'm counting on it." A pause. Then, behind her, the room vibrated faintly. Her phone was blowing up with alerts. Breaking news banners flashed. A new recording had just leaked, this time from inside a private donor dinner. A muffled voice. Donald Trump's. "She thinks she's a hero now? She's nothing. Just a blogger with a big mouth and no leash." The backlash had officially become war. The golf course in Bedminster was quiet that morning, but not peaceful. Trump's swing was off. His foot shifted mid-stroke. The ball sliced hard right into the pond. He stared after it, jaw tightening, as if the water had just insulted him. His caddy hovered nearby, silent. 2 Secret Service agents exchanged glances from the cart path. Everyone around him knew not to speak unless spoken to today, especially after that clip had gone viral overnight. The leak from the donor dinner was everywhere. His own voice, his words, just a blogger with a big mouth. Trump had issued no official response. Not yet. But the storm was brewing. Even his usual defenders on Newsmax were cautious. Steve Bannon's podcast tried to steer the base back to culture war talking points, but his callers didn't care. They wanted answers. "What about the daughter?" one asked live. "Why would Tiffany do this unless there's more?" Back at the club's private dining room, Trump slammed his phone down so hard the glass cracked. "She thinks she can humiliate me and get away with it?" he barked to his legal team. "She played it like a prosecutor," said one lawyer, cautiously. "Everything she laid out was fact-based, verified. We don't have a clean counter-narrative, yet." Trump sneered. "She's nobody." The room went still. Another aide cleared his throat. She's a sitting congresswoman and, frankly, she just won the public. Trump shot him a look that could freeze fire. I made her, he growled. You think anyone outside Texas knew her name before I showed up? She got famous off me. The legal aide didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Crockett hadn't gotten famous. She'd gotten dangerous, and her approval numbers were skyrocketing. The messaging war began that afternoon. Fox News aired a 12-minute segment titled, The Left's New Martyr, How the Media Built Jasmine Crockett. The host smirked, showing old footage of Crockett debating college campus issues, trying to paint her as a radical in pearls. But the smear campaign fell flat. Clips from Jasmine's speech were being reposted faster than they could be buried. Her tone, her control, her refusal to shout or grandstand, it made her look like the only adult in the room. Trump's team scrambled. They drafted a statement condemning the leaks as deeply private family matters weaponized by political operatives. But even Melania refused to sign it. She's his daughter, she said quietly when aides brought it to her suite. Not an operative. That night, Trump agreed to go on Hannity. It was supposed to be a cleanup job, a return to form. Instead, it turned into a visible crack in the mask. She's exploiting my family for her little moment, he said, voice raised. These people, they don't care about truth. They care about headlines. I gave Tiffany everything. Everything. Hannity tried to steer him back. But sir, do you deny that the tape? Fake, Trump snapped. It's a fake tape. Spliced, deep fake garbage. We're having it looked at. But no one believed it. The next morning, cybersecurity experts confirmed the tape's authenticity on Good Morning America. Former White House staffers confirmed Tiffany's voice. One even said he remembered the night she cried in the hallway after being told to sign something and shut up. And then came the poll numbers. Trump's approval among suburban women plummeted by 14 points in 48 hours. Independent voters called Jasmine trustworthy in new focus groups. Even, some evangelical leaders issued statements urging transparency. Behind closed doors, Trump's inner circle began to fracture. She might force discovery, one lawyer warned. If Crockett files an ethics inquiry and the House Judiciary backs it, we could see financial documents subpoenaed, campaign ones. Trump slammed his palm against the table. I'll bury her in litigation. A young advisor, too green to know when to shut up, muttered, That's what Nixon said. The silence was suffocating. Trump's knuckles whitened around the chair. She thinks this is over, he hissed. She has no idea what I can do. But somewhere beneath the bluster and threats, a flicker of panic passed through his eyes, because for once, he wasn't setting the tempo. She was. They struck back just before dawn. Screens across America flickered with headlines that felt surgically timed. New allegations surface about Jasmine Crockett's legal career. Was she really the reformer she claims? It started with a strategically clipped video, Jasmine in a Dallas courtroom, raising her voice during a heated exchange with a prosecutor. The angle was bad, her tone sharp. She threatened the DA, a right-wing host claimed breathlessly. This is who Democrats are lifting up? But anyone who watched the full footage saw the truth. She was defending a homeless veteran wrongfully accused of theft. The prosecutor had tried to fast-track the case without due process. Jasmine had refused to let it slide. She was doing her job, her former client said in an interview later that day. That woman fought like my freedom was her own. Still, the smear machine accelerated. A story surfaced about an ethics complaint filed years ago by a local judge, never ruled on, quietly dismissed. But it didn't matter. Headlines did the damage. Congresswoman Crockett once reprimanded for courtroom conduct, they screamed. Ignores. In the full context, cable panels lit up. She's not the saint people think, a commentator on a rival network muttered.